record on this. If you can hear that, but my recording is in progress. Okay. That's just Laura in the chat. Okay.
Go in live.
Fantastic. Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
How are we? Good to see you. There we go. Morning. Hi, Stacey. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good. I've got half an hour. I'm rehearsing today, so I thought I'll come on for the beginning, then I'll catch the end later.
Half an hour's bang on. That's good. Half an hour of anyone's time's good. Hello, Michelle. How are you doing? Hi, Sarah. How you doing? So, thank you for joining us for this Pathmaker and the catch up. Today is the Pathmaker webinars. Is the turn of the producer, and we've got the wonderful Conrad Lynch with us. Yeah. The man who can and makes things happen, which is very good. And Conrad, so you've got those questions. We'll just sort of pass over to you to sort of, if you can say the questions loud and then work through them, because this is being recorded for us to put back onto the website, and so that the schools can check in, which is really good. And we're actually going to be going to, there's a couple of schools have asked us to do what we do here in real life, in real life, but do you know what I mean? Wow, like go into the schools. Yeah, it's good. Well, at 9:30 on a Friday, you should all be in school, unless they're from my neck of the woods, and they'll probably be wagging it. So we can, we'll head into there at some point. Great. Conrad, then over to you, Sensei.
Brilliant. Thank you for asking me to do this. I'm Conrad Lynch. I'm a producer. So my first question is, how did I get into the industry? That is quite simple, but not probably what you would imagine. I didn't do a youth theatre. I didn't do drama. I went to university in London to do history. And how I got back into theatre was my dad's fault. My dad was a teacher. He came down for a conference, and I don't know if anybody remembers the magazine Time Out. It used to be the Bible if you were in London, and in the back of Time Out was a discount voucher for the Young Vic Theatre for an Arthur Miller play called Two-Way Mirror that was starring the brilliant Bob Peck and Helen Mirren, and my dad was obsessed with Helen Mirren. So we went to see that, and in the back of the programme was an advert. They were looking for front of house staff. So my dad said, oh, you could go and supplement your student loan by going to do some front of house, and that's what I did. So I went to be an usher at the Young Vic, and then I was lucky enough, or not lucky enough, to kind of be asked to do box office. And then I had a choice. I could either go and do the graduate development program at Ford in Dagenham to do marketing for cars, or go and be the finance assistant at the Young Vic for very little money. So of course I chose the finance assistant job, and that's how I got into working in theatre. And it was, you know, brilliant place to be, the Young Vic. It was before it was refurbished, so it was a leaky kind of breeze block nightmare of a building, but you know, did brilliant work, and yeah, kind of changed my path and changed my bank balance, but not for the good. What challenges did I face? I mean, it's kind of working in the arts, it's so competitive, and I think one of the challenges, particularly when you start, you know, your working life kind of in that assistant role, is kind of where do you go next, and sometimes it's quite hard. And one of the things that I found when I was the finance assistant, I suppose there was a bit of frustration that at the Young Vic it was brilliant because you didn't really, you had your job role, but you kind of were allowed to do lots of different things. So, for example, she's actually the chair of our board, Sue Emma, who runs the Regional Theatres Young Director Programme and is still at the Young Vic. She's the Associate Artistic Director there. We had a Christmas show at the Young Vic that wasn't selling. At that point, the Young Vic did really beautiful family shows. So instead of the marketing department, which was only like 1.5 people, Sue and I, who at that point was the admin assistant, were dispatched to Covent Garden to try and give out free tickets. And it was really, really hard to do that because nobody wanted, they thought we were some kind of religious kind of fanatics, and people would, you know, walk away from us. But that, you know, it's kind of like we were asked to do something, so we kind of went and did it. We'd be the fire officer, we'd be all sorts of things. But I think one of the challenges was kind of what to do next, because I knew that I didn't want to direct, and I kind of wanted to kind of make work. But I suppose at that point there weren't as many producing opportunities. It was kind of, there was the admin role, or there was the finance role, or with the kind of education role. So it's kind of wondering what next. So I decided that the thing to do was go and work for a local authority. I might have been mad. So I went to work up in Stevenage as a local authority officer. And that was brilliant because you kind of got to see the other side of it, about the funding and kind of all the challenges there.
Conrad, can I just for some people, if some of these students or might not, can I just take a moment to go back? Can I ask two things? One is where were you from actually? Where do you originate from?
Oh, right.
And the other is, what is a producer? For those who might not have heard the term but have no idea what it is, can you just sort of, that would be helpful, I think, for people.
Sorry, so I'm from Rochdale, kind of over the border in Lancashire, not Greater Manchester. We're very adamant about that. So I was brought up in just outside Rochdale on the moors on the Pennines, surrounded by sheep, and went to school there, and then decided I wanted to kind of, as lots of us do, kind of go and live somewhere else for a while, and that's little while turned out to be 25 years. But we're now based up in Cumbria, so we've kind of come full circle. So we're back to kind of being in the middle of nowhere. Jimmy, what is a producer? It's a really good question. Because as I was saying, the kind of producer, the job title producer wasn't really kind of around very much when I started working, and it was often the role of the producer is it is about making stuff happen. So it's about enabling, it's about supporting those people, the artists that are making the work. So it's kind of making it all happen, whether that's raising the money, finding venues, all the scheduling, all the finance. So a lot of it is all the kind of boring administrative stuff. And that's something that often you kind of forget, and you think about all the kind of glamorous stuff. But it's really important, and there is some kind of perverse thrill about getting funding confirmed and making sure that budgets are kind of maintained and managed properly. And you're also that foil for the artist as well, because sometimes, and Jimmy needs to close his ears, is you kind of sometimes need to rein people in, because sometimes the ambition and the kind of drive is sometimes a little bit bigger than the project, but it's kind of maintaining that balance. And you are kind of the the parent to that kind of company that's making the show, and you kind of you look after them. There's all that pastoral care, so it's looking after the artists and the performers and the musicians and the technicians that are kind of making the work. And for me, the biggest thrill I get from the producer is about kind of brokering and making those relationships. So it's it's putting together those teams of artists to kind of work together. And so it's easier kind of in the commercial sector in some ways to have a more creative role in producing than sometimes in the subsidized sector, because in the subsidized sector you've often got a very strong creative voice that's leading an organization like the brilliant Jimmy and Lou. But in the commercial world, it's a little bit different, because the producer is kind of the creative voice, because you're coming up with the idea, you're coming up with the projects. So I've worked for ATG, and it was brilliant because you were able to come up with ideas for shows and put together those teams and make that work. I mean, the downside is that they've got to recoup financially, so there's that massive pressure to kind of make sure that you don't lose a fortune. So that's definitely a challenge. So that kind of, I suppose, leads me on to some of my, what are my career highlights. Oh, it's really hard. I've been really lucky to work with a wide range of organisations, and I think probably one of it's really hard. I suppose one of the highlights is my first West End show, which was completely unexpected. I work for a company called Oxford Stage Company that are now called Headlong, a national touring organisation, and I was working with the artistic director Dominic Drumgoole, and I'd only been there a couple of weeks, and we were looking at a project to do on national tour, and we'd done some Noel Cowards, we'd done some kind of well-made British plays, but we wanted to champion female writers. And I went to see my friend Thea Sharrock, the director, her production of Top Girls, Carol Churchill's Top Girls at Battersea Arts Centre, that she'd won the JMK award for. And it was brilliant, but it was done on a shoestring. It was done in a studio space at Battersea Arts Centre, and I got Dominic to go and see it, and he said we have to revive that. So we revived that on national tour, and then it was such a success that we remounted the tour, and we took it into the West End, and nobody ever thought that you would see it would have no names in it. And it went to the Aldwych for a season, and we were all slightly taken by surprise, and it completely sold out, and it was fantastic. So yeah, I think that's probably one of my highlights. And the other one I probably would say is I was lucky enough to work at Shakespeare's Globe, and again that was with Dominic Drumgoole, and often you do kind of follow your artistic directors around the country, and we I suppose a few things from that organisation. I was lucky enough to take my first show overseas. I've never done any international touring, and normally you'd think you'd do something quite small, so you maybe take a two-hander or a small scale piece. No, we decided to take kind of 50 people to Korea, and it was amazing taking a full globe show to the National Theatre of Korea, which was extraordinary. But we chose the most obscure Shakespeare. We should have taken Romeo and Juliet or Hamlet, but we took Love's Labour's Lost, which is bonkers and really hard for English speakers to understand in the first place. So we had to kind of adapt it quite significantly for the Korean audience, and it was brilliant. It was absolutely knackering. You think, oh, you're going to go international touring and you're going to have a great time. I had about half an hour to go and do sightseeing. It was brilliant, but it was really hard work. But we were the best-selling show of that festival, so that's quite reassuring. We were also the most expensive, as they kept telling us on numerous occasions. But at the Globe, with Dominic, he had a real passion for new writing. And what was brilliant is that because you have that massive venue and you have big companies, we were able to commission writers to really write for that specific space, but also write at a scale and ambition that you don't kind of get, whether even at the Royal Court or the Royal Exchange or the Everyman in Liverpool. And it's really unusual because the Globe doesn't get any public subsidy, so it doesn't get any, it's not an MPO, it doesn't get any revenue funding. So the main summer season at the Globe has to make a profit, and it has to make a profit that pays for the whole of the season and then gives a surplus to the trust. So doing new writing sometimes is a bit of a risk, but Dominic took that risk, and some of it worked and some of it didn't. We did an infamous new play by Eric Schlosser, the American writer who wrote a best-selling book called Fast Food Nation, and he wrote as a play about the writing of the American Constitution. And it was probably one of the least dramatic plays you could ever imagine. I mean, from a history point of view, it was amazing, but it didn't quite work on stage. But one of the most successful pieces of new writing, and it's probably one of my favourite things, was a new play by Howard Brenton called Anne Boleyn, about Anne Boleyn and linking in with the King James Bible. And it was a phenomenal success. It was amazing to see the Globe completely full for a piece of new writing, and we were very prudent with our budgeting for new writing, and we only ever programmed them for about 10-12 performances, but that show was completely sold out, and we revived it the following year, and it became the best-selling show of the season. And then with English Touring Theatre, we took it on tour, and one of my favourite ever moments was being in Edinburgh at the Festival Theatre in Edinburgh and seeing over 1,000 people watching a piece of new writing, again with no names in it, in a big lyric theatre, and it was extraordinary. It was absolutely, amazing. So I think they are probably my favourite highlights. I think there are more, but I kind of can't mention some of the others for fear of embarrassing people. But there've been lots of things. But I think one of the things that I really love is kind of working, particularly for Oxford Stage Company and the Globe, was establishing my love of touring. And that is something, it is amazing, just taking your work to places that don't get fantastic quality performances and just seeing those audiences kind of react, either good or bad. But that, touring is brilliant, and it's often kind of seen as the kind of poor relation to the West End or London or big cities, but touring is brilliant. It's knackering, but it's brilliant. Right, what's my next question? What career advice would you give to your 16-year-old self? I think that is just have a go. Just don't worry. Just if you've got something passionate, if you've got that kind of, that desire to do something, just give it a go. I think one thing I thought was a little bit too cautious. So I just said, life is short, just give it a go, and you never know where it might take you. I was really lucky, and this kind of links in with the next question, which is about who are some of the people that have helped you. That I was lucky enough to kind of take advice from a casting director, Anne McNulty. She told me to take the job at the Young Vic. She said, just give it a go. If you don't like it, you can always leave. You can always stop doing it. And I think that's really sage advice. Just give it a go. And if you don't like it, you don't have to keep doing it, whether it's a job or a project or some kind of piece of just give it a go. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And there's nothing wrong in things not working. We've all in our careers have things that kind of haven't quite worked. You don't get 100% hit rate. So yeah, just give it a go. So some more people that have helped me. Yeah, Anne McNulty, she's an amazing casting director. And she has been very kind of instrumental in kind of supporting me, and she supports lots of other artists and makers. And she's genuinely kind of brilliant. She worked at the Young Vic, and she also worked at the Donmar Warehouse for a long time, and she's now freelance, and she's now focusing a lot of her career on supporting younger artists and actors, which is fantastic. And the other person that I jokingly say is there's a producer called Rachel Tackley, and I kind of say my life is 6 degrees of Rachel Tackley. I first met Rachel when she ran a company called Shared Experience back in probably about, it was probably about 20 years ago. And she and I then kind of worked in tandem. She working at Shared Experience and I'm working at Oxford Stage Company, and they were part of what was called the Matrix companies, and that was a group of four or five companies that the Arts Council funded to kind of deliver national touring work. So there was English Touring Theatre, there was a company called Method and Madness that don't exist anymore, there was Complicité, Out of Joint, and Oxford Stage Company. And what's extraordinary, when I was doing some clearing out the other day and found an annual report from back in about 2003, it's extraordinary to think about what the Arts Council did ask us to do. So we had to tour 36 weeks of work every single year. So we would always have 2 tours on the go. And when you look back at it and I'm thinking, God, that was a lot of work. No wonder we didn't know whether we were coming or going. But yeah, so we never had just 1 tour on the go. We always had 2 on the go. And sometimes we would produce 6 shows a year. And thinking about it, I don't quite know how we did it. I mean, we were lucky we had, massive amount of subsidy. Yeah, doing that amount of work, no wonder we were absolutely exhausted. But Rachel Tackley's been brilliant because she's kind of allowed me to kind of develop as a producer. So we produced the national tour of Yellowman from Liverpool Everyman Playhouse, and I was very lucky to work with Kathy Burke at Oxford Stage Company, and she and I bought the rights for Joe Alton's Entertaining Mr. Sloane, to produce that in the West End, with Kathy in it. But sadly, Kathy became seriously ill and couldn't do it. So it looked like the project wasn't going to happen. So I just went for a chat with Rachel, who was working at ATT at the time. And Rachel just went to her board of directors and said, this is the brilliant project. We had the director, Nick Bagnall, who recently was at Liverpool, slated to direct it. ETT should produce that in the West End, and together with Carol Winter, a producer we produced it in the West End, and we thought we wouldn't get any casting, and we had Matthew Horn attached to it, but nobody else, and we just decided we wanted Imelda Staunton, so we just went to see her, and she said yes, and it was brilliant. It was just, Rachel was such a support. And again, the good thing is it's all coming around that she now works at, she's the creative director at Riverside Studio. So actually, Jimmy doesn't know this. I think we're going to go and have lunch with her next Thursday. So it continues, and it's those relationships that you make that kind of carry you through your career. And one big thing is kind of never kind of piss off people kind of on your way up or when you're established, because you never know kind of where they might end up, and they might kind of help you. So it's always kind of being decent. And I suppose that's the next question about, well, what advice would you give someone wanting to enter into your career now? I think there's, it's great if you get formal training. There are lots of different courses now, but don't worry if you don't train to be a producer or an administrator. It doesn't matter, just as I said before, kind of give it a go. But one of the big things, particularly now, is about volunteering. That if you're able to volunteer, that's kind of, it really gives you an insight into how industry works. I was really lucky. I volunteered for Complicité years ago, and organised a massive. I did all the travel arrangements for a tour in Southeast Asia and Australia and New Zealand, and it was brilliant. I got a free month's holiday. But it's that you kind of volunteer because it kind of gives you that experience, and you never know, through volunteering you might end up with a job, and it's really good for your CV. So that would be my top tip. And also, just I would take if you want to work in theatre, don't worry about, I need to go into a producing job. Just take any job, because it's kind of getting you in that door. So go and be an usher, go and be a finance assistant, because you never know where it might take you.
Brilliant.
So I think that's my top tip.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Conrad. It's really interesting and informative for me hearing it as well. Has anyone got any questions?
Yeah, I've got one. Oh, sorry, Laura, you waved and put your hand up. I jumped in. No, you go, please.
Hiya. Hi, Conrad, right. So this is something I've always wanted to know. So I presume it's the same for like straight acting and plays and stuff like that. But when I've always auditioned for musical theatre, you always get to a certain point and it's probably a final, and then they go, "Oh, the producers are in." So how much influence do you have on casting those shows when the producers are in that final audition?
I think as I said before, it differs if it's in subsidised or commercial, because in some ways the power in the subsidised theatre often lies more with the artistic director or the director of the show. But also, you know, in if it's in a producing venue, the permanent artistic director does have a producer role as well. So that, you know, it's kind of it might not be in the job title, but it's definitely there. So they, you know, when I was casting with Liz Stevenson, particularly around our Christmas show at Theatre by the Lake, it was very much that joint kind of decision. But when I worked for ATG, it was very much there is the imperative sometimes, as you will know, Laura, from working for with ATG, that there is that you often need your star casting. But we were very mindful that, you know, you might have that lead casting, but then it was putting together the kind of best ensemble you could, and particularly, yeah, we definitely weren't kind of, oh, the producers are in the room. It was that, you know, we didn't go to all the castings, and it would be a conversation. And you know, particularly, you know, with those big musicals that we did, it was around getting the best ensemble. So it was never, we would never veto anybody, but we would always make suggestions, and it would be working with the casting director, and it was really trying to, you know, make sure that we did the best for the show. But sometimes, you know, it is a little bit alarming when you're kind of in a room and you probably say, oh, the producers are in. And it's a bit naughty to do that, because it's not particularly fair on the person auditioning, because it's like, oh my God, I've got to really impress these people that are sitting there. But, you know, that we were very mindful that we weren't the people that were going to be spending 4 weeks in the rehearsal room and then 20 weeks on the road, day in, day out with, you know, with them. So it was very much, we wanted, well, I particularly, you know, make sure that it's the, you know, the best ensemble we can get. And it's getting that, you know, sometimes it is getting that right character fit, you know, because when you're, as you know, when you're kind of living in and out of people's pockets for, you know, that length of time, it's making sure you're trying to get that family together, so it's a really good mix. So yeah, it's definitely, I don't like it when people say the producer or
Great, thank you. Let's go Seb then Lottie.
Hi, Conrad. Yeah, one of the interesting things about these Pathmaker speeches, talks, TED Talks we've been having, is that people haven't necessarily, ironically, started with a path. No one started going, I'm going to end up being there. And what I'm interested in as a producer, I get it as an actor and lesser as a director, about the competitiveness between those people. Is there any competitiveness within producing? And if so, what's that like?
Yeah, yes, there is. Again, you know, it's probably more in the commercial world than it is in the subsidized, and that's, you know, particularly producing in the commercial world. It's sometimes around the project. You know, I remember when I was at ATG, we were in a kind of I'd say, you know, a bidding war sounds a bit pretentious, but we wanted the Tricycle Kiln Theatre's production of Handbagged to come into one of our theatres in the West End, and we wanted to. We were saying we would produce it for them, and I think to be fair, Indu was very reticent about going with the big beast of ATG, and I think probably she might have been right, and she you know, sought advice, and you know, she decided to go for an independent producer working with Ellen Lloyd. I think for that show it was probably, you know, it was probably right. But you know, there is that competitive nature around shows, particularly about transferring shows that start in the subsidized sector that are big hits. That you know, it's sometimes that, you know, if you're in that lucky position that you've got lots of people vying for it, that it's finding that right fit, I think. And also, you know, kind of making sure that, you know, there are no sour grapes, that, you know, if a different producer gets it, then that's absolutely fine. I think probably in the subsidised sector, sometimes it's that people can be a little bit protective over work, and sometimes there is a bit of competitiveness around kind of co-producing, and yeah, again, it's about finding that right fit for the project with the co-producer and, you know, the teams at each of those theatres. But you know, and it's healthy to have competition because it makes us all perform better. But it's something that Rachel and I have talked about. You know, it's about being decent and being honest, and it's not about kind of pulling one over or making sure that you know, you want to get the best deal for your organisation, but it's about being fair and it's about being decent, and it's not kind of, you know, scoring over other people. But on the whole, we're pretty. I think on the whole we're pretty decent with each other, I think, as producers. And it's great. There's an organisation called I've completely forgotten, the Independent Producers kind of support organisation. It's great that there's that kind of voice for independent producers. And the other great thing is that we have our industry body, UK Theatre, that is a great support. I am slightly biased because I'm a trustee of that, but they're a great resource to have, both for venues and for producers.
Muted. Brilliant. Thanks. Over to you, Lai.
I was just wondering what the difference was when you talk about subsidised and commercial in theatre. If you could break that down in like layman's terms, what it means, and if you had a preference for working in either of them and why.
So subsidised, that is organisations that receive funding. That's primarily from the Arts Council of England. So the Arts Council of England has a funding programme called National Portfolio Funding, and that's money that they give to organisations like the Royal Exchange, Bolton Octagon, Liverpool Everyman Playhouse, for 4 years. So those organisations get money for 4 years, and that's, you know, making sure that they can, you know, produce work on a year-round basis. And then there's other companies that, you know, like Not Too Tame at the moment, that are project funded by the Arts Council. So those companies that are subsidised, the money comes from, primarily it comes from the Arts Council, but it can come from other trusts and foundations like the Paul Hamlin Foundation or the Esme Fairbairn Foundation or the Wellcome Trust. So it's money that comes from kind of public or kind of donors and foundations. And commercial is, you know, it is the money to make the show before it goes out on tour or goes for a run in a venue comes from investors. Often they're called angels. So for example, ATG, Ambassador Theatre Group, is the world's largest theatre, live theatre owner, but also it has a production department where I worked, and it owns a couple of subsidiary brands. So Sonia Friedman Productions is part of ATG, as is the Jamie Lloyd company, and you have a pool of investors that will invest money into the capitalization of a show. So that's getting it up to the first night, so it's paying for all the physical production costs, all the fees, all the rehearsal costs up until the first night. So those investors pay for that capitalization, and then during the life of the show, the investors hope, not always the case, it's probably about a third of shows recoup, they want to recoup their investment. So during the life of the show, the revenues from box office need to pay for the running costs, but also need to recoup some of that initial investment. So I don't think you would do it to kind of make money every time. So I think it used to be about a third of all shows recoup all their money, and sometimes it's the shows that you least expect that will recoup. Things like Mamma Mia, which was produced as a filler in between I forget what one of Cameron Mackintosh's show and I think it was Mary Poppins or another show at the Prince Edward Theatre, and they thought it was going to last about 6 months, and here we are 20 odd years later, and Catherine Johnson, the kind of playwright who had worked a lot in the subsidised sector, never in her wildest dreams thought she would kind of make so much money, and I suppose, you know, kind of not have to write again. I mean, she has, but yeah, there's sometimes those surprising shows that kind of can become the massive hits. I don't know whether I prefer working in either. I mean, I think working at Shakespeare Globe was brilliant because it was kind of a mixture of both. The theatre season itself was commercial and it was driven by revenues, and the way that it works is that it has a 13-show week, so it's kind of like having 2 venues. So there was a massive commercial imperative to maximise, you know, revenues and exploit all that work. So we started to film our shows. We started to, you know, tour them internationally, and take them into the West End and take them to Broadway. And that was quite nice because it was, whilst there was that commercial imperative from that theatre season, the organisation was also a charity, so it was, there was all the fantastic education work and the research and the library, and at that point there was the exhibition. So that was kind of the best of both worlds. There are pros and cons of working in both. In the commercial world, you don't have to report to a funder or an arts council, so you've got more freedom. But with Arts Council funding, you've got the reassurance that you do have funding in place to do the shows rather than having to raise it on a project by project basis. There are pros and cons for both equally stressful, but both equally rewarding.
That's a very diplomatic answer, that, isn't it? That's into politics. Brilliant, Conrad. Thank you so much for that.
No, thank you.
And thanks for those questions. I think they were really good from the guys there. But yeah, thank you so much. I'm mindful that you and I got another meeting.
Yeah, I've got another meeting.
So I'll let you have a break. But genuinely, thank you. And it was really informative for me. And I always say this at the end of, you know, these Pathmakers, even when you're in the industry, you're like, oh, right, okay. And they give you sort of recolor things for you and put some things into perspective. But that was brilliant. So thank you so much for your time this morning.
Graham, thank you very much. See you soon.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Conrad.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.